Sparkle will freak out your enemies, and today I'm gonna tell you how to build her best. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So, what relics does this agent of destruction, or elation I suppose, wish to utilize? 4-piece hackerspace is gonna be your best bet. Gives your team a nice chunk of speed, and there's no other supportive relic set that suits Sparkle as well as this in all of her best-in-slot teams. The 2-piece providing a bit of speed is also great for Sparkle herself, as the more of its Sparkle moves, the more she can advance your other characters forward and generate more energy, which equals more skill points. Eagle of Twilight line also works if you're trying to get your Sparkle to move more often, though the only thing that I dislike is that you won't activate the 4-piece as often as you may think, because you only use Sparkle's burst when you're low on skill points, so the advance forward can easily miss a cycle if you're smart with your skill point management. Otherwise, neat set if you know what you're doing with it. 4-piece Musketeer also works as it gives Sparkle 6% more speed, and she has some very hefty speed requirements which we'll touch on soon, though the attack and damage are kind of wasted since Sparkle doesn't deal any form of meaningful damage whatsoever throughout her entire kit. I'd replace this with a hackerspace set at your earliest notice. 2-piece mix and match sets include 2-piece speed percent, def percent, or HP percent. You go for a defensive secondary option because we can't run 2-piece speed percent plus 2-piece speed percent yet, and because Sparkle does no damage, attack percent and damage dealt percent is useless. Going for a defensive option alongside 2-piece speed percent will at the very least keep Sparkle alive. As for her 2-piece string and orb, well, 2-piece Broken Keel is going to be Sparkle's most universal and generally her best choice on the whole. Sparkle's not very demanding stats-wise, pouring all of her requirements into speed and crit damage, so fishing for enough effect res to trigger a 2-piece shouldn't be all that difficult. Plus, it'll aid in keeping your Sparkle alive in the first place. The 10% crit damage to all allies also applies to Sparkle herself, and since Sparkle buffs based on crit damage, it's essentially 10% free CD for herself. Fleet of the Ageless is pretty nice if you want to provide your whole team attack, and the HP percent is good for her own tankiness. Don't underestimate how good attack percent is as a buff. After all, Robin is an amazing character, and one of her big selling points is how much attack she gives everyone, so don't turn your nose up simply because it isn't crit. A good flexible choice overall. 2-piece Penacony gives Sparkle a bit more ER, not that this matters a whole ton though, as it's a very small bit of ER that doesn't influence how many actions it takes for Sparkle to regen her ult, and it isn't even 2-piece Penacony's main selling point. Rather, the 10% damage bonus it gives to all of her wearers of the same type is. This'll buff the likes of Zila, Qingque, Jade, though keep in mind that you don't really use Sparkle of Jade, traditional DPS Shui Yi, and Silver Wolf. As cool as that is, keep in mind that the extra damage bonus is usually only a few extra percentage better than the crit damage of Broken Keel. Sprightly Von Wank can be good if you know what you're doing and are trying to 1 or 0 cycle because it works upon entering battle and never refreshes. Good if you know what you're doing, otherwise the previously mentioned options are more consistent overall for a longer form battle. The next one I'm about to talk about is not a recommendation, but rather me giving you advice to avoid it. I don't love Celestial Differentiator, because you're essentially only using it for the extra 60% crit damage. The bonus crit rate doesn't matter at all, and even if it did, big whoop, since it's only usable for one attack. Not even one full turn! As for Sparkle's main stats, simple. Go for speed boots, a crit damage percent body, an HP percent or def percent orb, and an ERR percent rope. Sparkle's buffs scale off of crit damage, so you want to build her with the crit body. The speed boots help her reach her hefty speed demands. Her orb can be defensive, as quantum damage percent does nothing for her really, but to remain optimal, make sure that your Sparkle has a crit damage substat on her orb, preferably speaking. And she wants to ult often, so an ERR rope should help do the trick. Sparkle only has 2 main stat goals, 3 if you're on Broken Keel. 160 speed, 180% plus crit damage, and 30% effect res if you're on Broken Keel. Sparkle wants to be fast in order to outspeed all her allies and advance them forward as much as humanly possible. 180 crit damage or more is a healthy amount to aim for in order to reap out some solid benefits from a crit damage buff, and the effect res is nice not only if you're using Keel, but also just to prevent Sparkle from falling victim to status ailments too often. The top relic combo that I recommend, which will be useful for most of Sparkle's use cases in my opinion, is 4-piece Hackerspace and 2-piece Broken Keel. This insane young'un has various light cones at her disposal. Because this is a rerun guide, let's go over all the new Harmony light cones first, and see if they have any special synergy with Sparkle. Flowing Nightglow, Robin's light cone, works surprisingly well on Sparkle. While Sparkle giving herself attack percent doesn't really do anything, the chunky damage percent increase that she gives to the entire team after using her ult is very solid. The main problem with it is that it has a low uptime, only having a duration of 1 turn. Very good light cone for Sparkle, but I'm not sure why you'd own this cone if you weren't planning on using it for Robin. Do note that the ER, while it seems good, still doesn't influence the amount of actions it takes for Sparkle to use her ult again. Dreamville Adventure is way too complicated to use practically. You'd need to know your rotation game plan inside out in order to utilize this properly. Most of the time, you'll be providing skill-based buffs because Sparkle will most often skill every time she moves, but this can easily be broken up by the occasional ultimate or basic attack. Not highly recommended unless you really know what you're doing. That wraps up all the new Harmony Light Cones since Sparkle's release, since Sparkle is a pretty recent character. Let's get on to Sparkle's more traditional mainstays. Earthly Escapade is obviously nuts for her. She gets a ton of crit damage up front as a stat stick, and she provides her teammates with lots of crit rate and damage. The cone is a stacking mechanic, but it's very easy to upkeep on her. To cut down all of its yap, using Sparkle's ultimate will refresh all your stacks and allow the crit buff to remain active. That's all there is to it. Very good cone, though replaceable with cheaper options, and I'm not a fan of pulling for support light cones over DPS light cones unless the support in question is Ruan Mei. Bronya's light cone is also pretty neat for Sparkle. It increases the damage of a next moving ally after Sparkle uses her skill because Sparkle already recovers so many skill points. I consider the skill point generating aspect of this light cone to be more of a nice bonus more than anything else. Once again, the energy recharge looks good, but it doesn't actually have all that much of an influence over how often Sparkle gets the ultimate. Past and Future is an incredible free-to-play option which works really well with Sparkle. Since it's free from the MOC store, you can easily acquire the refinements for this light cone, and this is on the whole an excellent choice. Because of his light cone, I don't think you need to feel any extreme pressure when it comes to getting Sparkle's signature, since this is already so damn strong for her. DDD is also quite a good light cone on Sparkle, especially if you know what you're doing when it comes to turn orders. I do prefer buffing options over this pick, but DDD is still going to be a very formidable option. Planetary Rendezvous is going to be excellent in Mono Quantum teams, that gets especially good with refinements. Otherwise, you can skip over this choice if you aren't going to be playing Zila anytime soon. Ah yes, the width diff of this game. Carve the moon, weave the clouds. My advice is to skip over this one and pick Past and Future instead, because Carve's buffs are always randomized and the consistent buff that Past and Future provides is stronger on the whole. Chorus is the only freestar light cone that I feel really works nicely on Sparkle, so if you're a new player if nothing else, Chorus will work in the meantime until you can acquire a copy of Past and Future. Sparkle's main best team is always going to be hypercarry teams that are really low in skill points. The first team that comes to my mind is Imbibitor teams. Sparkle upgrades Imbibitor so much to a stage where it's unreal. The only buffer that comes close is E1S1 Bronya, which not everybody is going to have, and even then, Sparkle's skill point generation is infinitely more consistent than such a Bronya. If you're a big fan of Dylan over here, then I wholeheartedly recommend the core of Dylan himself, Sparkle, either another Harmony like Tingyun, or a debuffer like Pella, and a Sustain. He is easily Sparkle's main selling point in my opinion. Alongside that, we have Zila for Zila Mono Quantum. Sparkle is a special passive in which he buffs the attack percent of everybody based on how many Quantum teammates there are, so Sparkle and Mono Quantum is easily Zila's best bet. The only problem I have with this synergy is that Zila's light cone wants you to build speed, whereas Sparkle wants your Zila to build attack, creating an awkward anti-synergy. So Zila's best in slot is more likely to be any other Hunt 5-star light cone in this team, and I have faith that Fei Xiao's light cone might be a pretty good opt here, but we'll have to wait and see since we don't know what it does yet. Just telling you to keep an eye out for it if you're interested. Qingque also works really well with Sparkle for the same reasons as Zila, except that Sparkle's skill point regeneration is amazing in this team considering how badly Qingque vacuums him up to fuel her gambling addiction. Just like the rest of us, eh? Anyways, QQ is pretty good with Sparkle, and this is a synergy worth considering. Insert pretty much any Quantum main DPS of a team's head in this core, and Sparkle will most likely work wonders with them. Sparkle also works well with Jing Yuan in Pure Fiction. Such a sick game mode name, by the way, still can't get over that. Anyways, Bronya isn't ideal with Jing Yuan because her damage buff will only buff Jing Yuan's movement and not his Lightning Lord follow-up attack, whereas Sparkle provides a longer lasting crit damage buff which lets his Lightning Lord reap the benefits, and more skill points is always nice as Jing Yuan wants to use a skill every time he moves. A good Pure Fiction synergy on the whole. There are some characters that Sparkle doesn't really want to work with. Blade, because he's already very skill point efficient and prefers Bronya, and same for Jing Liu. DOT teams also dislike her because crit damage isn't welcome in them, and Kafka Swan is a dual carry team, so dual buffers like Ruan Mei and Robin are preferred. And while follow-up attack teams can use Sparkle by technicality, once again, dual buffers are simply a lot better in them. And break teams are also not fond of crit whatsoever, and want Ruan Mei way more, causing Sparkle to not be heavily contested here. I will say that one odd synergy that you all may not expect is E0 Acheron with Sparkle. Yes, I said E0. There is the Acheron, Sparkle, Welt, and Pella team. It's a very strong team that you should absolutely give a shot if you're a C0 player, but that's not what I'm talking about. I mean Acheron, Sparkle, Jiaoqiu, Sustain. Sparkle's buffs have always been competitive with filling out Acheron's passive fully. The problem has always been generating enough stacks for Acheron, which Jiaoqiu does. So Sparkle is a pretty good E0 Acheron unit on the whole, the more you know, huh? The best comparison is Vape Lenny from Genshin Impact. He has a passive which demands using free pyros, but using Farina to vape is actually stronger than completely maxing out his pyro passive. Either way, the TLDR about Sparkle's teams: skill point hungry hypers, quantum teams, and Acheron teams. Don't let Sparkle fool you, as she's pretty straightforward to understand. Her basics are, what do you expect at this point? They're basic, man. Her skill will provide an ally with a flat crit damage increase, and then some more based on a percentage of your Sparkle's crit damage, which lasts for one full turn. She'll also advance forward your ally by 50%. Very cool, the main meat of Sparkle's kit for sure. Thanks to how action value works, this is essentially an instant action. To summarize, she refreshes AV when a character has very little left. Sparkle's burst is also dazzling, Anyways, it gives you 4 skill points and gives all your allies Cypher. This effect will give your allies a damage boost scaling off of trace level depending on how many talent stacks you have. Speaking of which, let's cover that now. Her talent increases the max number of skill points that you have by 2, and when any ally consumes 1 skill point, all allies' damage dealt increases by a percentage based on trace level. This can stack up to 3 times and last for 2 turns. These are the quote-unquote stacks that the ult was talking about. Sparkle's technique allows you to sneak past enemies undetected, and when you enter battle, you immediately regenerate 3 skill points for the team. Very neat. As for Ascension passives, simple. Sparkle's A1 will have her basic restore an additional 10 energy. Okay, cool. Her A4 stretches the crit damage boost to last until the beginning of the buffed character's next turn as well. This is good for follow-up attack-based attacks like the Lightning Lord, or when you're casting your ult in between your turn and the enemies, which is something you can time yourself. Then Sparkle's A6 will give everybody an unconditional extra 15% attack, and for every quantum teammate in the party, some more attack is given. Don't let this masked fool trick you, as she is still very much a unit that non-quantums can enjoy to the fullest. It's more of a nice bonus than anything else. As for trace priorities, simple, go for this. Sparkle's skill is her central source of buffing, so beef it up first. I'd say her talent and ultimate are equally as important considering that leveling her ult doesn't change the amount of skill points she generates, and both provide a damage boost. Just ignore her basics as they're completely unneeded. Pretty easy to understand unit, yeah? I have no idea if Sparkle actually has a place of employment or not. Okay, cool, she's a quote-unquote masked fool, that doesn't pay the bills though. And Pentaconi is damn expensive from what we know. How did she even afford a room? If you want to fund Sparkle's bills, then let's talk Eidolons. This causes Sparkle's ult to be more important than before, and the extra buff it provides is pretty cool. I still prefer Ruan, Mei, or Robin and DOT teams, however. Def Ignore, no matter the gacha game, is consistently the strongest kind of damage increase possible. This E2 is ridiculous, I don't think you need me to tell you that. Very worthwhile. The skill increase is great, but why the basic increase? Either way, more skill scalings are always good. Pretty good quality of life E4, but if you're struggling that much with your skill point management when you're actively playing Sparkle, then you have some other things to reevaluate. The talent and ult upgrades are grouped here. Pretty good stuff, but nothing to go out of your way for. Her E6 essentially jacks up Sparkle's crit damage buffing abilities and turns it into a virus throughout your entire team, giving it a way longer uptime. It's a great buffing E6, but I personally think it's a bit disappointing and shouldn't be pulled for deliberately as the first E6 unless you're already a casual whale who drops thousands on every character release. Let me know down below if you're gonna pull 100 light cones of the next character. Why is this becoming an actual, normal thing? Anyways, a great effect that definitely isn't necessary by any means. Get a DPS E6 instead, it will be infinitely more impressive to you. I don't really like Sparkle's vertical investment. Past and future isn't that far off of her SIG, and her E2 is good, but the rest of her Eidolons are kinda whatever. In any case, if you care, then get E2 Sparkle first, then S1, then all the way to E6. Otherwise, drop it. E0, S0 is fine. Damn, sucks to be Sparkle. Looks like her bills aren't getting paid. Sparkle is a very strong character who will work excellently with numerous different types of units. If you're more for traditional hypercarries, then I believe that you'll be very pleased with Sparkle on the whole. Generally would recommend. She is and has been the Bronya power creep ever since she came out, and there is generally no harm in having her on your account. Her biggest flaw is that she clowned on my GOAT Aventurine, but her kid is also goated, so it's fine. On the whole, a very free-to-play friendly buffer. Hopefully this video was able to tell you how to get your Sparkle sending her enemies into insanity. This has been Juice, signing out, and dude, let's be real. No, you can't fix her.